Hey guys, Jack Spirko here. Just straight up, if you're watching this on YouTube, you may see me kind of looking this way. I've got two recorders going here, and I can only look at one of them. I am streaming this live on Facebook, and I'm going to make copies of the other video, the one in normal video format, not vertical, for video Facebook Live, available. Anybody that wants to share it elsewhere, it'll be on YouTube. You can share it anywhere you want. Just know if you're watching on YouTube and it looks like I'm not looking at the camera, number one, I'm blind in this eye. Number two, I'm looking up at the other camera. So, we're here to talk about COVID-19 and COVID SARS-2 virus today and a cure. And I did say a cure. And the reason I'll call it a cure is because it's more that today than it was when I started talking about this a month ago. I've been pretty frustrated with the government. I've been pretty frustrated with the system. And I'm going to admit that maybe I was a little overly frustrated because I've learned some things in the past day about the reason for the delay in deployment of this. And some very encouraging things about what's going to be a very, very, very rapid deployment of this. And I want to be clear, this is the anti-malarial. Everybody's talking about it. I could have come out early with it. I have a very reliable source from the information I'm about to give you. But I have one source. I have one source of this information, and I wanted to sit on it for a day because I do consider myself not just a podcaster, but a journalist. And when I start speaking in the world of what I know versus what I think or my opinion, I strive for accuracy. This probably cost me scooping some of this because it was on Fox News last night, part of what I'm going to tell you. But for me, what that is, that's my second source. See, a real journalist, before you go spouting your mouth off, you have two independent sources, or you have a source of the information that I have not heard released, and then you have publicly available information that seems to corroborate the source. That's where I am. I want to be clear about that. The next thing I want to be clear about, it seems like if you got somebody sitting already on a ventilator and you give them this medication, it might help them some, but it's not a silver bullet. But a doctor in France is the latest one to come out with this information. It was a peer-reviewed study of this old anti-malarial. It's made in the 1940s. This is an 80-year-old medication saving mankind, right? Is what this really is. One of the reasons I didn't think this would go this far is we've known about this from the Australians since 30 days ago. We've known about this. There's all kinds of regulations with production and things like that. It's part of the delay here. And I expected, like, oh, gee, we found this. Let's start using it and saving people's lives with it. It's not that simple. This medication, Chloroquine, and if they ask you to take it at some point, don't be afraid of it. I took it multiple times on tropical deployments to prevent malaria. Not only does it have a cure rate in this peer-reviewed study of 50 out of 50. Let me say that again. They took 50 patients. They gave them this medication. They got rapid cure and total destruction of the virus in 50 out of 50. It's almost unheard of in a medication against a virus. And it also protects the lungs. And one of the things that you need to understand to get what's going on here is this is almost two different things. And that's why they tried the HIV drugs. Because in some ways, the HIV virus causing AIDS is a lot like the Corona SARS-2 virus causing COVID-19. Person gets SARS-2 coronavirus does not mean that they will get COVID-19. COVID-19 is the deep lung distress. It could just be, I'm having a hard time breathing, or it can be, I need to be on a ventilator or I'm going to die, or I'm going to be on a ventilator and still going to die. You just don't know how far it's going to go. People that get the lung distress, and maybe even some people that don't feel a lot of lung distress, this disease also damages the lungs, possibly permanently. How bad, we don't even know yet, and I think it depends on the severity of the infection. If people are given this drug prior to exposure, they basically don't even get it. If they're given to it after exposure, when they test positive, but before they develop critical symptoms, they don't develop critical symptoms. And if they've started to develop more advanced symptoms, it still helps them. That's how I understand it up till now. So you might wonder, why the hell aren't we doing this? Well, when this started out, these doctors first in Australia, then in Korea and South Korea, I should point that out. South Korea and Japan and China, who I do not trust, but since their data matches the data of the Australians, the Japanese, and the South Koreans, it's probably good. Took a cocktail of a mix of 2 HIV suppressing medications and this malarial, and they just kind of dumped it into people. And some bitch, they got better. Problem was, well, was it a combination or one? So they started running trials, and it was a doctor in France that ran a trial using only the Chloroquine, only the anti-malarial. They got a 50 out of 50. Other trials have since been made aware of used just the HIV suppressing drugs, didn't show a difference between standard of care and the use of those. So that's out. Now here's the part. Now most of that, if you're paying attention and listening to real sources, you would know. Here's the part that I know that I have not heard released anywhere else yet. I got a contact. I put out a petition 2 or 3 days ago because I was pissed off that this was not being used in America to save American lives. And frankly, around the world to save lives everywhere. They're talking about trialing it. And I wrote an article about that. Said there's a cure for COVID, so let's use it. My opinion was if you don't know which one of the three is, just keep using it all on most people and pick some people that are a little less risky to trial your crap with until you know. Well, that was actually going on already. But it was going on in very limited small numbers because that drug, specifically the anti-malarial, hasn't been made hardly at all in the last 20 years. It's old. It's been replaced. The only reason it's even still around and sitting on shelves somewhere is because when they have a highly resistant strain of malaria, they use it instead of the newer drug. That's the only reason it exists. There is one, and this, I'm going to go now. I'm giving you information from my source, an unnamed employee of a major pharmaceutical company. There is one company in America, and I think maybe the world right now, that can actually start making this stuff now. Right now, there's a tiny handful. What my sources told me is by maybe the end of next week, there will be more of this stuff than they could ever need to use. That's how fast they're ramping up production. And to me, that's the best news I've heard since this whole thing started. Now, again, I want to be clear here. That does not mean that somebody that's sitting on a respirator right now, if you give them this stuff, it's a guarantee that they're cured. But it means for maybe everybody, but certainly the vast majority of cases with testing positive, you give them this, done. Knocks it out. And most people that are even have more complex symptoms, done. Knocked out. How far where's that line before, we need to get it to you by this point? We don't know yet. So let's talk about some of the things that are going on with social distancing and lockdowns and why everybody needs to keep their damn head right now. You might think, well, if they knew this was coming, why did they do all this? Well, because they're going to have a limited amount of this stuff in the beginning, and there is a point, a threshold that people cross over that it really can't do a ton for them. So the more containment you have before you can mass deploy this. Now I'm off my source. I've given you what my source has given me. Let's say he gave me some information. He said this is the piece you can talk about, and this is the way you can talk about it. I don't ever violate a source. And this is a valid, known source. It's been a listener to my show for a long time. This is not some screwball, person out of left field with that I can't validate. Okay. But now I'm back to my opinion. My opinion is, first of all, much of what I've just told you, Donald Trump is probably going to tell you today. There's a big announcement coming. He'll be standing with the head of the CDC, I think at CDC. And I think the reason they've kept this under wraps is this proven study just came out. The speed at which has been moved here, when it's revealed to people, is going to blow them away, I think. This was not something that normally could just be started with a switch, but it was almost started with a switch. It was like, this works, screw it, we're doing it. So what I think is they're trying to contain this outbreak so that when they start having this drug available and it starts going to all the hospitals, the first wave of it can go to people that really need it, and we don't have people backing up. I think the other thing that they want, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Somebody's going to get right now, I got a stuffy nose and stuff because it's freaking allergy season, right? I've been taking my temperature. I'm running no temperature, whatever, and I'm staying social distanced and all. But there's going to be a whole lot of worried, I need it. Give it to me. Don't be that freaking person. Because we're going to go from people going, I need it, and not having enough, to a suggestion that pretty much I think that's what they're going to say. I think pretty much everybody should take this and just knock this thing out. And the more containment you have on this prior to that rolling out, the better off everybody is. Now, does that mean that I agree with every decision to the level of every lockdown done everywhere? No. But I don't control what the San Francisco city does. I don't control what Seattle does, and I don't control what New York City does. And one thing I think y'all in places like New York City need to understand, when you have 8 million people living on an island, something like this can move very, very quickly. And wouldn't it suck if you or someone you loved ended up needing a respirator and dying a week before a pill could save your ass? That's exactly where we are right now. This is great news, but it ain't over yet. And I am hoping that the next few months is the best thing in the world that's ever happened to America in some way. I think it is the best thing that could have ever happened to create a culture of preparedness in America. I've been using that phrase for a very long time. The first time I ever saw it in print was way back when I started doing what I'm doing about 12 years ago. Lieutenant General Honore, who was the one that came in and took over Katrina and prevented it from being worse than it already was and turned it around, started using that term in a book that he wrote. And I had him on my show and interviewed him all those years ago. And he said after Katrina, we need a culture of preparedness. And we've seen what's happened since Sandy, Harvey, dozens of other storms. And what Americans have been able to do is sit at their TV set and go, those poor people. Those poor people. But it wasn't them. This is the first thing we've had happen in the lives of most adults in America that literally impacted the lives of every single person in this country. And the people in this country who have been impacted the least by this are who? Preppers. Preppers and people that live lives of liberty and independence. Homeschoolers. Most of y'all that are homeschoolers, school's closed? Okay. You have to take care of your kids? Okay. That's what we do every day. I'm not saying it's been a cakewalk for anybody. I'm just saying the people that are prepared. And how many of y'all out there, hit your little wave button, right, or whatever, or say hello to me or whatever, that you're preppers, people have known you're preppers your whole life, people have always thought you're a little bit odd, but you've gotten a phone call or an email asking you for advice recently. Like or do something. How many of y'all have heard that on the guys on, look at the freaking thumbs going, right? Like, all of a sudden, you're not crazy anymore. So my hope is this ebbs out, and it's still gonna seem like a long time, but it's gonna be relatively fast. There also might be some blowback from this knowledge of people. You gotta let us out, whatever. Man, the individual local governments are gonna handle that. Again, my opinion doesn't matter. It doesn't mean nothing. My opinion about civil liberties and all. This is what is. My advice to you right now: be the gray man. Stay away from people. Keep your head down. This is going to pass relatively quickly, and the world will get back on doing what it does. Now I want to go further into my world of theory. Now I'm totally into theory, just so I'm clear here. Let me get a coffee. Coffee doesn't kill COVID, but it makes it feel better. All right. I'm going to talk about politics now, but I'm not being political. I'm making a political analysis of where I see this going. Should have learned to turn my phone off there. At least I didn't get interrupted on the Facebook one. The YouTube one might have to be put back together now. Anyway, so this is where I see this going from a standpoint of a political future. I think this is why Trump has pushed so hard for as much economic stimulus as he can get. That's not an advocation of it. It's an analysis. Please understand that. Not an advocation, an analysis. The more he can get done, the faster the economy rebounds. The day that this comes out, you start watching people in Congress drag their feet on this. Of course, a couple of them got COVID, so maybe not so much. And the more you can put ahead of this, I believe that everybody knew this was coming, but they didn't know what it would look like. They didn't know if it was going to be the HIV drug cocktail. They didn't know if it was going to be the Chloroquine malarial that it is, or it was going to be both. All three of those look different. Producing a mixture of two drugs that are old but not as old that are still relatively expensive compared to one is a lot different than producing one that's stupid cheap. My understanding is that the at least in America, some portion, if not all, of these are going to be given to America by the pharmaceutical companies. I'm sure they'll get their money on the backside. Politically, I think it'll be spun this way. The left is going to say, Trump withheld the cure, or something stupid like that. And then when they say, okay, we're making America, we're going to solve our problem first, and then we'll start exporting it, they'll say, he's xenophobic or some other crap, or we need to, take the hit with the world or some other bullshit. You take care of your own first. Every prepper knows this. It's not you don't help your neighbor. There's nothing to that. You help your neighbor, but the first thing you do is you stabilize your home. Then you help your neighbors that are here, and if you still can, you help your next neighbors. And if you still can, you help your next neighbors. That's common sense. I think we'll hit this hard. The first places we'll start exporting to are going to be Canada and Mexico. And then probably Europe and Asia. And probably really, really fast. So that's kind of what I see coming there. And I do see a recovery that's pretty sharp, but it's going to take some time. There's some things that are not going to be able to restart. And I think you're still looking at 2 to 3 weeks until kind of we're back to as normal as you can be after something like this. So that's where I think we're headed. Hillary already called Trump a racist again. That doesn't surprise me. I don't care. But I'm reading some of the comments for those of you on YouTube off of Facebook right now. But that's what. Can I read? Oh, Jesse's asking me on Facebook. Can I recap the cure? I'm going to wrap up the YouTube version. Y'all can ask me questions in the comments, and let's go just with the Facebook live feed.